Welcome to the Kyle Olson Show. On Monday, the Michigan Conservative Coalition held a press conference on the Capitol steps with attorney David Kallman, Karl Manke, and 3 of the 7 hairstylists who were cited for, quote, disorderly conduct during the recent Operation Haircut protest. I went to live stream the press conference for Breitbart News, which you can find on our Facebook page. I want to play you some of the highlights from that event. There are so many fantastic people in Michigan who understand what is at stake and are willing to fight not just for their rights, but for mine and yours. One of those people is Angela Regas. I spoke to her during the protest a couple weeks ago after she received her $1,000 citation for being disorderly. She shrugged it off. That was really the amazing thing. She just, that's all right. Here's what she told reporters on Monday.
A month ago, we took part in a legal and lawful and peaceful protest against the governor's unlawful and unjust executive orders. Orders closing our businesses, stopping our livelihoods, permanently closing some businesses that were not able to ride it out during this closure. The citations that we received on that day were a clear violation of our First Amendment rights, our rights to freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom to go against the government when they are being unlawful. Those are God-given rights. The governor's duty is to protect those rights, not to write orders against those very rights. Now she's making an example out of us. In the future, this basically states if you do not comply, you will be punished. That's not the way our government works. The governor's job is to protect our rights. Don't ever forget that. The God-given rights in the Constitution, those are our rights, and they shall never be taken away by the government.
Can you imagine having a legislature full of Angela Regases? Can you imagine how different the fight to protect our rights from overlords like Gretchen Whitmer would be? I can guarantee you that message that she just delivered to the media went right over their heads. That, what she said, was a foreign language. I spoke to Angela after the event, and here's that. So what message do you think they're trying to send by prosecuting you and the others?
You know, I think about Boston, right before the revolution, and the redcoats were trying to force the rebels to comply or be punished. That's all I think about during this time. It's historic. It's historic. We will not comply. We will not comply to this.
Isn't that amazing? Can you imagine her in a position of political power? Attorney David Kallman and the stylists also spoke to reporters. I filmed Karl Manke talking to a couple mainstream reporters, including one from WLNS in Lansing. Here's Manke's exchange with Ashley Graham. It's hard to understand her because she's wearing a mask and there's lots of ambient noise, so I'll play it and then interpret it for you.
I'm essential. Who is to tell me that my business is not essential? It's essential to number one to my living. To what? Sustaining life? Yeah, I mean, this is all part of who we are as individuals. When our governor locked us down, she locked us down physically and says, I'm going to take care of you. Just stay in your house physically. There's another component to us. There's a mental and there's a spiritual component to each one of us. You lock somebody up in their house, and they took that absolute as gospel truth from the governor. 6 months later, 6 weeks later, 3 months later, you're going to have a very vacated human being.
He was talking about his business, and she said, quote, do you believe it's essential to sustaining life? I'm sorry, what? Even he seemed taken aback. Let's play it again.
I'm essential. Who is to tell me that my business is not essential? It's essential to number one to my living. To what? Sustaining life? Yeah, I mean, this is all part of who we are as individuals. When our governor locked us down, she locked us down physically and says, I'm going to take care of you. Just stay in your house physically. There's another component to us. There's a mental and there's a spiritual component to each one of us. You lock somebody up in their house, and they took that absolute as gospel truth from the governor. 6 months later, 6 weeks later, 3 months later, you're going to have a very vacated human being.
A mainstream TV reporter who may be the very definition of non-essential to sustaining life has the audacity to ask that man that question. Who the hell does she think she is? Does anybody think TV reporters are essential to sustaining life? Anybody? Is that really the debate we want to have, they want to have? Speaking of the mainstream media, there was a protest last week in Lansing, as there are pretty much every night these days. So a group of about 30 people representing Black Lives Matter blocked the intersection of Michigan Avenue and Foster Street. They live-streamed the whole thing on Facebook, because isn't that what everybody does now? A couple of protesters were open carrying, which of course is legal. That's their right. The video showed a motorcyclist who approached and wanted to cross Michigan Avenue, which is his right to do since, it's a public road. The protesters who were illegally occupying the intersection wouldn't allow him. He didn't approach hostilely. He just wanted to cross. He probably didn't understand what was happening or why these people were blocking the road. Two of the agitators pointed their guns at him as he argued with Paul Birdsong, the organizer. Remember that name. Lansing police were positioned a half a block away, you can see it in the video, and did nothing. Later that night, during the same live stream, the whole group blocked the entire width of the road and walked west towards the Capitol. A driver was attempting to use Michigan Avenue because it's his right, and it's a major thoroughfare, and he was driving east. It's not clear from the video whether Paul Birdsong deliberately wedged his legs under the car's front bumper or the driver bumped into him, but either way, guns were out, the driver put his hands up, literally, in surrender, and the agitators were attempting to intimidate him into not using the public roadway. Again, police did nothing. I wrote about this on Breitbart. You can find it all there. Steve Gruber sent me a message he received from one of his listeners. The person sent my story to the Lansing State Journal, and the paper responded to that person, quote, Breitbart is not a reliable news source, and this story is not accurate. This video was taken early last week, not Friday, in parentheses, the paper responded. The video was published on Friday, and so I said it was posted Friday. Ultimately, does that detail even matter? No. But as I often do with any one of these other video posts that I write, I describe the situation and quote the individuals involved. The reader can draw their own conclusion. That's called journalism, at least how I understand it. Maybe the Lansing State Journal has a different standard and definition. Here was the paper's excuse for not reporting on the incident. Quote, we cannot possibly cover every negative interaction drivers and protesters have with each other. It's not uncommon. Unless it rises to the level of someone getting hurt, we likely will not cover it because we just don't have the time or the resources for it. Oh, that poor newspaper. Just too busy to cover agitators pointing guns as citizens just trying to use a public road. And no one, of course, is asking you to cover every negative interaction. I can guarantee you if one of those armed protesters who, quote, stormed the Capitol a few weeks ago had pointed their guns at anyone, the Lansing State Journal, hell, the Attorney General would have been all over that. But you know what they had time for? A massive profile piece on agitator, organizer, Paul Birdsong. It reveals the Lansing State Journal's massive blind spot for leftists and social justice warriors. In fact, here's what Paul Birdsong told the Lansing State Journal. Lansing as a town doesn't mean anything to me. He doesn't care. Well, no wonder he and others want to sow chaos and rioters burn and loot and steal and don't care. The place some people call home doesn't mean anything to him or them. That explains it. I played that clip earlier from the TV reporter asking Karl Manke if he thinks his job is essential to sustaining life. Our media is full of useful idiots who think they're doing the right thing, but they're either accomplices in trying to burn down our country, figuratively or literally, or they don't understand the damage their moronic interpretation of what's really going on is, quote, essential to sustaining life. When we come back, my conversation at the Capitol with the one and only Karl Manke. This is the Kyle Olson Show. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. On Monday, I had a chance to talk to America's barber, Karl Manke, in the Capitol after the press conference with the hairstylist being prosecuted by Attorney General Dana Nessel for, quote, disorderly conduct. So that's why there's a lot of background noise, but here's our conversation. So, are you tired of winning yet?
No, I'm never tired of winning. Never.
So it's because I'm writing a lot for Breitbart about what what's happening to you, and it's amazing. Your attorneys just keep winning. What message do you think that's sending to everyone else who is fighting against injustice and the persecution that the governor is doing?
Right is right, and I believe that when a person stands for right, good things happen. I started this thing alone. I walked into my barber shop using that old serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And I screamed at myself, the courage to change those things that I can. When our legislature had told our governor that was the end, I said, good, I can go back to work. The next breath out of her was that she was going to defy that and set herself up as some type of a usurping the throne. And she was going to not only be the elected governor of Michigan, she was going to take over the legislature branch also. So I thought, listen, I've got bills coming up. I've got to make a living. When I heard that I was unessential, I'm thinking, not every one of my creditors believe I'm essential.
Right.
They're looking for the tax money for on my business. They were looking for my insurances, all of these things. Mm-hmm. And I walked into that barber shop alone. And the first day I was there, everything went smooth. I thought, okay, maybe this isn't going to be bad. The next day I walked in, and within an hour, there's a big sheriff standing there. I know him. I thought, oh boy, it's over. He says, Karl, look at me. I turned and I looked at him and he says, I love you. And I knew then, he got in his car and drove off, I knew then that I had support at another level that I didn't even imagine was there. Mm-hmm. And it kind of grew from there. Each one of these was a little bit more and a little bit more. And the encouragement kept coming to the point where I was getting 500 phone calls a day on my phone at my business. I had to have somebody, no sooner would they hang it up and there'd be another phone, hang it up, another phone. All over the world. So for months now, it's been sort of a meeting focal point for freedom and for people to come in and encourage me.
Well, I talked to someone recently who has friends in Hong Kong, and she told me that you're a hero to the protesters in Hong Kong. What is that? And getting calls from around the world, what does that mean to you?
It means to me, I obviously have been given some type of a gift that I'm not really aware of. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm 77. I got one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel, I'm an author, and I wrote my first novel in 2012, and I've written 10 of them since. And someone asked me at one time, well, why did you wait so late in life? I said, why am I going somewhere? I have no idea until I hear it. I'm 77. So whatever it is, I don't know what it is, but I know that it's evidently been effective, and it has encouraged so many other people, who have lost courage and don't think that there's it's kind of a silent majority type of a thing. It's not a big community where they get down and rap together and all this kind of stuff. It's individuals from everywhere. Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so happy. You said what I just wanted to say. You've been able to put words to what I feel. And so this is what it's been like. It's like Moses, I don't know when I'm picked, but, this kind of stuff. I just as soon be at my shop and doing what I do. That was the whole idea. I just wanted to make my living, write my books, just be what I've always been and what I've always done.
What's your message to the 7 women who are being prosecuted by the Attorney General's office and others who just want to make a living? They're not trying to bother anybody. They're not trying to make anybody sick. They want to do their jobs safely. What's your message to them?
Take heart. Today, we don't have the Pony Express, we have the internet. And the internet will reach out to those people who will support you. One of the things that this administration and all governments really hope is they can break you financially, because they have funds that just continually go on, and the individual, you have to have a slush fund with a pretty good sizable amount of cash in that thing,
right,
to get good attorneys to support you in this thing.
Right. So you still have the two two outstanding misdemeanors, correct? I think
all that's gone away.
It's all gone away. Okay.
Yeah, that's all gone away. Everything is.
So you're just back to work, and
there was 2 misdemeanors.
I think
it's back to the
original tickets.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
As to whether he wants to, swing in the wind alone, or what he's going to do, we'll see.
Right.
Whatever he wants to do.
Great. Well, it certainly is fun to cover you. Yeah. I know that it's probably not fun to be covered.
But listen, I don't mind. I believe in everybody's constitutional rights. I've taken every single request, whether it be I got a guy from the New Yorker. I'm interested to see what he's going to do. Mm-hmm. He hung around my shop for 2 weeks. I said, "You better be kind. You better be kind." And I think he probably will be in his own way.
Sure.
But that's our constitutional rights. He can write whatever he wants. Yeah, the question was, did you just do this for publicity? Did you just do this to sell your books? Did you just do this? Well, the byproduct of this is that happened.
Sure.
But it wasn't the intent.
Right.
That was the byproduct of all this. So it's been okay. I mean, I was on the Glenn Beck show, and he asked me about one of my books, and I was talking to him about this being very similar to a situation. One of my stories called "Age of Shame," that the Jewish people in the Warsaw Ghetto willingly got in those cattle cars. Mm-hmm. They weren't chased in there or forced in there. They were promised for they give us your little bit of freedom here, and we'll give you safety. Mm-hmm. And they willingly got in those cattle cars. Well, I won't get into a cattle car. Anyway, I mentioned that he says, "Well, what's your website?" Now, I told him KarlManke.com, and before I knew it, I had sold out of Age of Shame. Well, I had to reorder, and, that's okay. That was the byproduct of all that. That wasn't my intent.
Well, that works.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. You bet.
You may remember last week I talked to State Senator Ruth Johnson, who used to be Secretary of State and has big concerns about what current Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson is doing with her campaign for vote by mail. I asked Secretary Benson to be on this week, but her office declined. Of course. If she would have been here, I would have asked her 2 simple questions. 1, did you break Michigan law when you signed your name on a letter providing a ballot application to all registered voters, which MCL 168.931A prohibits? Yes or no? Simple question. 2, how does your action square with your own elections manual, which bans clerks from sending unsolicited ballot applications? Simple, right? I want to be fair, but I want to be direct, and I want answers. And I think you deserve answers. So after the break, we'll have Allegan County Clerk Bob Genetski, who has his own big concerns about what Benson is doing. So please stay for that. This is the Kyle Olson Show. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. I'm now joined by Bob Genetski, who is Allegan County Clerk. So last week I had on State Senator Ruth Johnson, who used to be Secretary of State. She had a lot of concerns about what current Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson is doing with regards to vote by mail. And so I wanted to talk to Bob today because I think he could shed a lot of light on what is going on at the county and the local level. So, Bob, thanks for joining me today.
Good morning, Kyle. It's great to be on the show.
So, first of all, tell me, because I know that you've been kind of vocal on Facebook about what's been happening with regards to vote by mail at the local level. So, tell me a little bit about what you're seeing.
Well, first of all, let's be very careful that we don't use the language that we're being deceived to using. In Michigan, we have a very generous, very liberal absentee ballot opportunity for everyone to take part in.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about vote by mail, we're talking about other states. Those are states like Utah, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and I believe Hawaii that have a vote by mail situation whereby they put a ballot in the mail and just send it to everybody on their voter rolls. I'm very glad that Michigan doesn't have that. At least we've got the safety check of people applying for that and signing a ballot absentee ballot application to get that. And then receive the ballot. But vote by mail is very different, but we are being taught by a lazy media and by a Secretary of State with a very radical agenda, being taught and tricked into using that language. And unfortunately, the media is picking it up and running with it every day. But I support absentee balloting. I support anybody in Michigan's right to vote absentee as long as they are a legally registered U.S. citizen who lives in that jurisdiction. So I have been on the train about this quite a bit, both on Facebook and in public end of the media. And the very first concern of it, and I should say that I really appreciate Senator Johnson's taking up this charge, because our legislature has been completely asleep and out to lunch throughout this entire process. And they're not going to know what hits them when it's all over. And the first and biggest concern about it is that Michigan election law is being violated by the person who was elected to uphold it.
How so?
Michigan compiled laws are very clear that a voter, in order to receive an absentee ballot application, the verbiage is that they shall ask either verbally or in writing for that AV ballot application. So we've got a waste of money to begin with in the Secretary's mass mailing statewide of these 7.7, I think, million that she sent out. And then we've got a direct violation of the law that says that the voter must request those. And the legislature basically minimizes themselves when they allow laws to be violated and don't even seem to care about it. Because if we're going to set a precedent for that law to be violated, what other election laws can be violated and arbitrarily created and dismissed by fiat?
So when you say they won't see what's about to hit them, what do you believe is about to hit them?
Well, first of all, we're seeing nationwide an awful lot of people knocked off in primaries. I don't know if you've been following that, but a bunch of incumbents knocked off in primaries in Pennsylvania, I guess in New Mexico, and we had some big ones in New York on Tuesday. So you've got a situation that people aren't even used to campaigning in, because the effort to throw a much wider cast net in and if you've followed my Facebook at all, you've seen that we had a 16-year-old in Allegan County receive an application to vote. I'm betting, Kyle, that she's not the only one statewide that received an application to vote. And thank goodness that young lady was responsible and very humorous in her written response to the Bureau of Elections. But in some cases where you've got some unsurly people who are not legally allowed to vote, but somehow have become registered, they might be taking part in the process, and I'm sure they'll have no problem destabilizing our entire election.
Well, in my personal story is that I have 2 registered voters in my home. Back for the May election, we received 9 ballot applications, 7 for people who used to live there but no longer live there. So what's really, this is a rhetorical question, but what's really stopping me, other than wanting to be a decent person, from signing that application saying, here's my signature, and then making sure that my signature on the ballot when I actually vote matches? Because according to Senator Johnson, the state and the people that check these things will not be comparing signatures to a driver's license. They'll be comparing signatures to the application. So as long as you can have the application signature and the ballot signature match, then you're basically good to go. And let's take a step back, though. You had said early on about the current Secretary of State's agenda. What do you think her agenda is?
Well, she's part of a radical leftist group out of Colorado called Vote from Home, which sounds very innocuous, and everybody likes those innocuous titles to hide behind. But it seems as if her long-term goal, which she keeps referred to as mail-in balloting, is to try and get Michigan to go to a state similar to those that just mail out a ballot to anybody and everybody on the voter rolls. And that the group that she's a part of also has put out some literature whereby they would like to, or I believe they're affiliated with that League of Women's Voters groups that's trying to get the signature verification thrown out.
Mm-hmm.
So there are fewer and fewer checks and balances. And it's interesting, I was asked over the weekend by a gentleman who received an AV ballot application to his home for a voter who does not live there. He said, Bob, what's the most secure form of voting? Because now this gentleman who's never thought about it is being made to think about it. Is his ballot secure and our election results reliable, and do we have integrity? And I told him the most secure means of voting is showing up to a polling location with an ID. Now, we all know that the secretary has jumped on the COVID train and is I believe she's purposefully trying to scare people from showing up at a physical polling location using COVID as a backdrop, with an effort to drive down in-person voting and to drive up absentee balloting, but to call it mail-in voting so that she can someday get Michigan to a place where we're just randomly mailing out ballots to anyone and everybody they can track down.
So talk a little bit about sort of the confusion that you're seeing in your county on the county level, but also the local, the municipal level.
Well, it's incredibly frustrating. I have tremendous faith. I've only been on the job as clerk for 3.5 years. Prior to that, I served in the legislature. But I have tremendous faith in our local clerks. They do a great job, and I've got both Democrats and Republicans in Allegan County who serve as local clerks. They do a phenomenal job of election security, of keeping their voter rolls up to date, and of making sure that to the best of their knowledge and ability, that only legally registered U.S. citizens who live in their jurisdiction are able to vote. But the mass mailing of AV ballot applications has completely thrown them under the bus. It makes it appear as if they're not keeping their voter rolls up to date, which they are doing the best job they can, but we need help from the state, and the state doesn't seem interested in doing so. If I heard Ruth properly on your show, I think she said that when she was in office, she scrubbed 1.1 million of voters who weren't either alive anymore or not eligible to vote in Michigan off the rolls. Among those were more than 3,500 non-citizens. And our local clerks do the best job that they can, but without support from Lansing, it makes it very difficult. And in many cases, I've got local clerks telling me, Bob, we took that person off the rolls a couple of years ago, and now they're back on getting an AV application to a random address. So it has completely undermined people's ability to believe in that the state is working with them. It's made our local clerks confused as to what's going on with updates they've made in the system, which both they have access to, but also Lansing. And it's made a lot of people question, whether or not election results are secure and safe. And Allegan County is a place where we have a lot of faith in our local elected officials. But it seems almost as if Lansing has a predetermined idea to try and get people to question that.
So as a former legislator, you were in the House. That it seems to me, based on what Senator Johnson told me, she's trying to get somewhere, but she has to have a partner in the Secretary of State who's willing to talk to her. And so far, that hasn't been happening.
No. She, from what I've seen, she doesn't seem to want to answer any questions in person or off the cuff. Now, keep in mind, this is a person who never ran an election before she got elected, Kyle. But the best Secretary of States are people who have run elections before. And you look at people like Ruth Johnson, who served as Oakland County Clerk. You look at people like Terry Lynn Land, who served as Kent County Clerk. And you look at people like Candace Miller, who served as a Macomb County Clerk. They all did a good job in those capacities. When they arrived as Secretary of State's office, they had the hardest part of the job down pat, and they knew it. When When our current secretary was asked about the mailing of AV applications, she kept slipping and saying mailing ballots, mailing ballots. So everybody knows that at this point, Michigan does not randomly mail ballots to people who may have been dead for 30 years, which would be very dangerous if we were doing that.
Right.
I do have.
And you see a lot of when you go through social media, because there have been a number of people I've seen on social media where they've taken a picture of the stack of applications that they received, and they said, I got these ballots in the mail. And so there's a lot of confusion going on. We're just about out of time. We've only got a couple seconds left. But if you were in the legislature and this was going on, what would you be wanting the House to do about it?
The House and Senate need to grant subpoena power to Secretary Johnson, and I believe Representative Calley is on the House side chairing that committee. I don't know why these committees haven't been up and running and in the face of the Secretary of State since she very first said she's going to break election law and send those AV ballots out. I don't know. For the life of me, I have no clue what the legislature is doing, not providing oversight while someone's breaking a law that was passed by both chambers and signed into legislation by a governor and is on our books. Either they need to provide that framework for election law and make sure that it's running and provide oversight when it's getting broken, or they just need to throw their hands up and recognize that election laws are going to be ignored and trampled for quite some time while they sit on their thumbs there.
All right. Well, Bob Genetski, Allegan County Clerk, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks very much, Kyle.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. The left is waging a dramatic cultural cleansing in America. Vestiges of our history are being torn down by mobs and woke politicians. Consider these two stories. From the Washington Examiner, June 17th, 2 schools honoring Washington and Jefferson to be renamed in support of Black Lives Matter. Two public schools in Berkeley, California will remove their names commemorating Presidents George Washington and Thomas Jefferson amid renewed and widespread calls from the Black Lives Matter movement for racial equality. The Berkeley Unified School District approved a resolution in support of Black Lives Matter, and in part it read, one of the action steps, initiate a school renaming process for Jefferson and Washington elementary schools in accordance with the district's policies. Farther south in California, the Whittier Daily News reported on June 15th, a statue of John Greenleaf Whittier, a poet, abolitionist, and Quaker the city was named after, was vandalized over the weekend. The still unidentified vandal wrote, quote, BLM, as well as, quote, F slave owners. It didn't actually say F, it said something else. So what exactly is happening? And here, in this example from Whittier, California, you had a abolitionist, which I'm guessing these people probably couldn't tell you what an abolitionist is, but they defaced an abolitionist statue in Whittier, California. Joining me now is Amanda House. She's deputy political editor and my colleague at Breitbart News. Amanda, thanks for joining me. So what is going on with tearing down and defacing all of these monuments and memorials across the country?
Yeah, so this is actually something that we've seen obviously take over our headlines in the past few weeks. But really, Kyle, this has been something that has been happening in our country long before Donald Trump, long before these recent claims of some sort of rise or resurgence in quote unquote white supremacy, which is obviously fake news. But this is really not about Black Lives Mattering. Of course, Black Lives Matter. This is not about police brutality or any legitimate concerns that maybe, would require some sort of conversation. This is a totalitarian political movement, and it's been brewing in our country for decades. And the ultimate goal, Kyle, is to essentially overturn our country, rewrite our history
destroy our heritage to make way for a different country. And we see this with this toppling of these statues and these monuments. They will say in one breath, this is about the Confederacy, this is about slave holders and owners. But you just cited how they're not just going after these people. They're going after Gandhi. They're going after Abraham Lincoln. That's one of the big narratives we're following this week in Washington, D.C. this week. They're literally going after the man who freed slaves. So this has nothing to do really with, Black Lives Matter. This really has to do with opening up old wounds and old racial divisions at a time, when our country really had kind of moved past a lot of these, horrible times in our past. But they're just trying to restart it and to cause tension. And really, this is political. This is not just your average protest.
Right, because what we've seen over the last couple of years is the targeting of Confederate monuments in, Richmond, Virginia, Charlottesville, et cetera. And it's, Robert E. Lee and other, figures of the Confederacy. Those have been the targets. But what we have seen since the killing of George Floyd is that view, has widened. And now
I have to take that step back. They actually were going after George Washington and Abraham Lincoln back in 2017. I wrote an article back then in which I detailed just case after case of incidences that had nothing to do with the Confederacy, had nothing to do with white supremacy, and they went after them as well. It, of course, has gotten much more rampant, and we're seeing more and more of this. But this did not start because of George Floyd. This did not start because of Charlottesville. This did not start because of Donald Trump. I'll tweet it out today again, but there's been incidences of this going on since long before this president took office.
Why do you think these cities are not defending these memorials? I mean, you take that one, Whittier, California. There's a Republican mayor, and I'm not criticizing him, but my point is that it's not Los Angeles. It's not San Francisco or Washington, D.C. Why do you think that that these city leaders are allowing these different statues to just be sitting ducks? And do you think it's too late to be able to protect these, and what needs to be done about that?
So to the first part of your question, this has been a trend that we've also been following, and that is of the right self-censoring itself, the right remaining, part of polite society. And the left, their new mantra, which they've been saying this for years, but it really kind of has been a big sort of slogan this latest go around, and that is white silence is violence. And not the silence of, sitting, like it used to be just you could stay in your own home and mind your own business, you could kind of stay out of the fray. But now that you're a racist if you actually are not out there toppling the statues alongside with them. So we've gotten to a different level of censorship. And the right, in America, what's worse than being called a racist? People are so afraid of being called a racist, and our public officials, they're now citing, public safety and, a protester might trip on his Molotov cocktail, so we need to take down the statues, preemptively out of concern. It's just, it is something that has happened, and I truly do believe it started in our education system years and years ago, where we have indoctrinated, brainwashed our generations to truly believe that being called a racist wrongfully is horrible, and you want to go to all steps to avoid that, and to the point where you're self-silencing, you're self-censoring, and look at our media. Our media isn't helping. I promise you right now, if somebody were to go out there and try to defend their neighborhood statue, their neighborhood monument, the media would label them a racist in a heartbeat. They'd probably get fired. Their friends, their family might, have to part ways because they don't want to be associated with them. There are ways in which the left has sort of tangled itself into all of our aspects of all of our lives that they have such control. And to the part of your second question, are we going to be able to pull back from this? Will we recover? I honestly don't know, but historically speaking, once a country starts to get to a point where they're book burning and they're knocking down statues, I mean, it never has ever ended well.
Right. And you make a really good point there about the media, because here in West Michigan, there's a statue, and I wrote about this on Breitbart. There's a statue in a group of veteran, related to wars, statues, where there is a Confederate soldier, a Union soldier, and then a freed black child in between them. And it's supposed to be, obviously symbolic of the Civil War. And there are some activists who are trying to take God out of the public square. They're atheists. They want to wipe out God, period. But now they focused on this statue, and the media just sort of goes along with this. And the Allendale Township Board met and said, no, we don't want to take that statue down. But the way the media portrays it is that suddenly, because this one person, this one organization complains, suddenly this is a controversial statue. And that's how it's framed in the media. And the media doesn't do anything to explain, well, here's the history of it. Here is the significance of it. This is why it should belong in the community. It's a controversial thing. And can you believe that those township officials are not going to take this down? So, and then you talked about schools, and that's very significant, because you are absolutely right. This is born out of schools, and this is born out of not understanding our history. And when I read this Whittier, California story, I thought to myself, what would be really good? Instead of teaching kids how to protest or how to, feel like victims, maybe the school district, the elementary school there, should organize a field trip and go visit the statue of this John Greenleaf Whittier and explain his significance to America and to their community. And the kids could actually really learn something and appreciate that statue. But that's not what they do. Instead, they have this Black Lives Matter mantra and, victimhood mantra and all of that. But we're just about out of time. But Amanda, I appreciate you coming on today and explaining what's going on. Breitbart, and call me biased, but Breitbart, I think, is on the leading edge of explaining what is going on in America, what is at stake, and what needs to be done about it. So Amanda House, Breitbart News, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. For more of my work, go to Breitbart.com or find me on Twitter, Kyle Olson 4, KYLEOLSON 4. And this week, I just joined Parler, and my name there is the same, Kyle Olson 4. This is The Kyle Olson Show.